The sound of gunfire echoed through the valleys of Colorado Territory in 1876, but Grace Murphy barely flinched as she loaded her father's old Winchester rifle. At 22, she had grown accustomed to the harsh realities of frontier life, especially since losing her entire family to scarlet fever the previous winter. The small ranch she now managed alone stood as the last reminder of a happier time, though the memories that haunted its walls often left her feeling more alone than the vast plains surrounding her property. Grace wiped sweat from her brow as she peered out the window at the approaching dust cloud. Riders, 3, maybe 4 of them. Her heart raced as she positioned herself by the door, rifle ready. Ever since Randall Thompson had set his sights on her land, strangers meant trouble. "Miss Murphy," a deep voice called out, "we mean no harm." Grace remained silent, watching as 3 men dismounted. The one in front, tall with broad shoulders and a weather-beaten Stetson, approached cautiously, hands visible. "Miss Murphy, I'm Jacob Blackwood, new marshal in Silver Creek. These are my deputies. We're tracking some cattle rustlers that might have passed through your property." Grace cracked the door open but kept her rifle positioned. "I haven't seen anyone. Now kindly state your business and move along." The marshal removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair and the kindest blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Madam, we've been riding for days, just looking for some water for our horses, if you'd be so obliging." Something in his steady gaze made Grace lower her rifle slightly. "The well's out back. Help yourselves, then be on your way." While the deputies led the horses to water, Marshal Blackwood lingered. "Pardon my saying so, but it's unusual to see a woman managing a ranch alone out here." "I don't recall asking for your opinion on my situation," Grace replied sharply. He nodded respectfully. "Fair enough, but if you ever need assistance—" "I don't need help from anyone," Grace interrupted. "Especially not a man." The marshal studied her for a moment. "Everyone needs somebody sometimes, Miss Murphy." "Not me," she said, closing the door firmly. Later that evening, Grace sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The marshal's words echoed in her mind. She'd been alone for nearly a year now, and the weight of solitude pressed heavier with each passing day. But after what happened with her former fiancé, Edwin, his betrayal and theft of her family's savings before fleeing town, Grace had sworn off depending on anyone, especially men with charming smiles and promising words. The sound of approaching hooves startled her from her thoughts. Grace reached for her rifle but relaxed slightly when she recognized Marshal Blackwood's silhouette. "Marshal," she acknowledged coldly as he dismounted, "I thought you'd be halfway to Silver Creek by now." "My deputies went ahead," he explained, leading his horse to the hitching post. "I wanted to circle back, make sure those rustlers didn't double back through your property." Grace crossed her arms. "I can handle myself." "I don't doubt that for a second," Jacob replied with a hint of a smile, "but these men are dangerous. They've already killed 2 ranchers north of here." Grace's expression softened slightly. "I appreciate the warning, but Miss Murphy—" The shout came from the direction of the barn. Both Grace and Jacob turned to see flames licking up the wooden structure. "No," Grace cried, running toward the barn where her 2 horses were stabled. Jacob was faster, grabbing her arm. "It could be a trap. Stay behind me." For once, Grace didn't argue. They approached cautiously, Jacob with his gun drawn. The fire was spreading quickly, consuming the dry wood with terrifying speed. "My horses," Grace whispered, her voice breaking. Without hesitation, Jacob dashed into the burning structure. Grace watched in horror as the flames grew higher. Minutes felt like hours until finally Jacob emerged, coughing and soot-covered, leading both terrified horses to safety. "Bucket line," he shouted, already running to the well. "We need to contain it before it spreads to the house." They worked side by side into the night, fighting the blaze until it was reduced to smoldering embers. By dawn, Grace stood staring at the charred remains of her barn, exhaustion etched in every line of her face. "This was deliberate," Jacob said quietly, examining boot prints near where the fire had started. "Randall Thompson's work, I'd wager." Grace's jaw tightened. "He thinks he can scare me off my land. You know him. He's been trying to buy my property for months. Says it's the perfect passage to move his cattle north. When I refused to sell, the threat started. Jacob straightened, his expression hardening. "Miss Murphy, I think you should come to town until I can sort this out." "Absolutely not," Grace said firmly. "This is my home. I won't be driven away." "Then I'm staying," Jacob stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "At least until I'm certain you're safe." Grace opened her mouth to protest but stopped. For the first time in months, the thought of not being alone brought unexpected relief. "You can use the spare room," she conceded reluctantly. "But just for tonight." One night turned into 3 as Jacob helped Grace rebuild the damaged section of her barn. They worked from sunrise to sunset, and despite her initial resistance, Grace found herself enjoying his company. Jacob shared stories of his time as a Texas Ranger before becoming marshal, while Grace gradually revealed pieces of her own past. On the 3rd evening, as they sat on the porch eating stew Grace had prepared, Jacob asked the question she'd been dreading. "What happened to make you so determined to face everything alone?" Grace stared into her bowl, considering whether to answer. Finally, she set it aside with a sigh. "I was engaged once," she began softly. "Edwin seemed perfect, charming, hardworking, devoted. After my parents and brother died, he was my rock, or so I thought." She paused, steeling herself. "2 weeks before our wedding, he disappeared with my family's savings, everything I had, left a note saying he found a better opportunity in California." Jacob's expression darkened. "I'm sorry that happened to you. It wasn't just the money," Grace continued. "It was the humiliation. Everyone in town knew. Their pity was worse than being alone." She looked away. "That's when I learned trusting someone only leads to pain." "Not everyone will betray you, Grace," Jacob said quietly. "Maybe not intentionally," she replied. "But eventually everyone leaves, one way or another." The next morning, Grace woke to the sound of voices outside. She quickly dressed and found Jacob speaking with his 2 deputies who had returned from town. "Thompson's been bragging at the saloon," one deputy reported. "Says this ranch will be his by month's end, one way or another." Jacob nodded grimly. "We'll need to set a trap, make him show his hand." Grace stepped forward. "I want to help." The men turned, surprised by her presence. Jacob's expression softened. "It's too dangerous, Grace." "It's my ranch, my fight," she insisted, "and I'm tired of being afraid." After some discussion, they formulated a plan. Grace would spread word in town that she was considering selling the ranch and would be meeting with potential buyers. Meanwhile, Jacob and his deputies would keep watch, waiting for Thompson to make his move. 2 days later, Grace rode into Silver Creek for the first time in months. The small mining town had grown since her last visit, with new storefronts lining the main street. She ignored the curious glances as she made her way to the general store, where she deliberately engaged the gossipy owner in conversation about possibly selling her property. "My goodness, child," Mrs. Peterson exclaimed. "I thought you'd never part with that land, given it was your father's pride and joy." "Sometimes we have to make difficult choices," Grace replied, loud enough for other customers to hear. "I'll be meeting interested parties at my ranch tomorrow afternoon." By the time Grace left town, she could feel the news spreading like wildfire. The trap was set. That evening, Jacob instructed Grace to stay inside while he and his deputies positioned themselves around the property. Hours passed with no sign of trouble, until well after midnight when Grace heard a soft noise at her bedroom window. Before she could react, the glass shattered and a burning torch landed on her floor. Smoke filled the room as the curtains caught fire. Grace grabbed her robe and rushed to the door, only to find it jammed from the outside. "Help!" she screamed, coughing as the smoke thickened. "Jacob!" The sound of gunfire erupted outside as Grace frantically searched for another way out. The window was her only option. She wrapped her arm in a blanket and cleared the remaining glass before climbing through, cutting her leg in the process. She dropped to the ground just as 2 men rounded the corner of the house. One raised his gun, but before he could fire, Jacob appeared behind them. "Drop it," he commanded. Instead, the man swung around, firing wildly. Jacob dove for cover while Grace scrambled toward the well. More shots rang out as Jacob's deputies joined the fight. In the chaos, Grace didn't see Randall Thompson approach until his shadow fell over her. "Should have taken my offer," he sneered. Grabbing her arm roughly, Grace fought back, clawing at his face. Thompson cursed and struck her, sending her sprawling. As he reached for his gun, Jacob tackled him from behind. The two men struggled, exchanging blows until Jacob finally subdued Thompson, pinning him to the ground. "It's over," Jacob panted. Securing Thompson's wrists with handcuffs by dawn, Thompson and his men were in custody, and the fire had been extinguished with minimal damage to Grace's home. As Jacob's deputies led the prisoners toward town, Grace sat on her porch steps, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "You were right," she admitted as Jacob joined her. "I couldn't have faced them alone." Jacob gently examined the cut on her leg. "You're stronger than you know, Grace Murphy. But strength isn't about never needing help, it's about knowing when to accept it." Grace looked up at him, truly seeing the kindness and integrity in his face. For the first time in a long while, she felt something other than fear or anger, a flicker of hope. "I should head back to town," Jacob said, standing. "Get a doctor to properly look at that cut." "Will you come back?" Grace asked, surprising herself with the question. Jacob smiled. "If you'd like me to, I would," she whispered. Over the next few weeks, Jacob visited regularly, helping Grace repair the fire damage and rebuild her barn. Their conversations grew deeper, their laughter more frequent. Grace found herself looking forward to his visits, even as she tried to guard her heart. One evening, as they walked the perimeter of her property, Jacob stopped by an old oak tree. "My father always said you can tell a lot about a person by the land they tend," he remarked, looking out over the rolling pastures. "This place reflects you, Grace, resilient, beautiful with hidden strength." Grace felt her cheeks warm. "It was my father's dream. I'm just trying to honor his memory." "You've done more than that," Jacob said, turning to face her. "You've made it your own." He hesitated, then continued. "I've been offered a position as sheriff in Denver." Grace's heart sank. "Congratulations," she managed. "When do you leave?" "I haven't accepted yet," he replied. "I wanted to talk to you first." "Why would my opinion matter?" Grace asked, though she already knew the answer in the way her pulse quickened under his gaze. Jacob took her hands in his. "Because in these past weeks, I've come to care for you, Grace, more than I thought possible." Grace pulled away, panic rising in her chest. "Don't, please." "Grace, I can't do this again," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "I can't risk being hurt like that." "I would never hurt you," Jacob said softly. "You say that now," Grace replied, tears threatening. "But intentions don't matter in the end. I don't deserve that kind of pain again." She turned to walk away, but Jacob gently caught her arm. "Grace Murphy, look at me," he said, his voice tender but firm. "You say you don't deserve love, but you're wrong. You're everything I've prayed for, brave, honest, with a heart so big you've been hiding it away to protect it." Grace stared at him, caught between longing and fear. "How can you be so sure?" "I'm not sure of much in this world," Jacob admitted, "but I'm sure about how I feel when I'm with you, and I'm sure that sometimes faith means taking a chance even when you're scared." That night, Grace barely slept, Jacob's words playing over and over in her mind. By morning, she'd made her decision. She rode into town, heading straight for the marshal's office. Jacob looked up in surprise as she entered. "Grace, is everything all right?" "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, removing her gloves nervously. "About taking chances." Jacob stood, hope evident in his eyes. And I'm terrified," she admitted. "But the thought of watching you ride away without knowing what might have been scares me more." The smile that spread across Jacob's face made her heart flutter. He crossed the room and took her hands in his. "Does this mean you'll give us a chance?" "It means I'm willing to try," Grace replied, allowing herself a small smile, but slowly. True to her word, Grace proceeded cautiously. Jacob courted her properly, with chaperone dinners and Sunday rides. He introduced her to his family when they visited from Texas, and Grace found herself welcomed with genuine warmth. Each day, the walls around her heart crumbled a little more. 3 months later, as autumn painted the Colorado landscape in brilliant golds and reds, Jacob asked Grace to accompany him to Silver Creek's Harvest Festival. The town square was decorated with lanterns and bunting, music filling the air as couples danced beneath the stars. "May I have this dance, Miss Murphy?" Jacob asked, extending his hand with a formal bow that made Grace laugh. "You may, Marshal Blackwood," she replied, allowing him to lead her to the dance floor. As they waltzed under the harvest moon, Grace realized how much her life had changed. The ranch was thriving, with new cattle and crops. She had formed friendships in town that she'd previously avoided, and most significantly, she had opened her heart again. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "How different everything is from a year ago," Grace replied. "I never thought I could feel this way again." Jacob's eyes softened. "And how do you feel?" Grace took a deep breath. "Happy, hopeful," she paused, gathering her courage. "Loved." Jacob stopped dancing, his expression serious as he led her away from the crowd to a quiet corner near the church. "Grace Murphy," he began, taking both her hands in his. "When I first met you, I admired your strength. As I got to know you, I came to cherish your compassion, your determination, your smile." He knelt before her, pulling a small box from his pocket. "I know we agreed to take things slowly, but I've known since that day by the oak tree that you're the woman I want to spend my life with." Grace's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl. "I'm not asking you to leave your ranch," Jacob continued. "I've spoken with the town council, and they've agreed to appoint a deputy marshal in my place. If you'll have me, I'd be honored to build a life with you at your family's land." Tears filled Grace's eyes as she looked down at the man before her, a man who had proven his worth not with empty promises, but with consistent actions and unwavering respect. "I once told you I didn't deserve love," Grace whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong. We all deserve love. I was just afraid to reach for it." Jacob's eyes shone with hope. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," Grace nodded, laughing through her tears as Jacob slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to embrace her. Their wedding took place the following spring, with wildflowers carpeting the fields around Grace's ranch, now their ranch. The ceremony was small but joyful, with Jacob's family and the townspeople of Silver Creek gathering to celebrate. As they exchanged vows beneath the old oak tree, Grace marveled at how life could change so completely. The woman who had once barricaded herself away from the world now stood proudly beside the man who had helped her find her way back to hope. "I promise to cherish you all the days of my life," Jacob vowed, his voice steady and sure. "To stand beside you in joy and in sorrow, to build our dreams together, and to remember always that love is worth every risk." When it was Grace's turn, she spoke from her heart. "I promise to trust you with my yesterday, my today, and all my tomorrows, to face whatever comes our way together. And to never forget that, even in my darkest moments, you saw light in me that I couldn't see myself." 5 years later, Grace stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching Jacob teaching their 4-year-old son Thomas to ride his pony. Their 2-year-old daughter Sarah played nearby, constructing elaborate stories with her wooden toys. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. They'd added orchards and expanded the cattle herd. Jacob had established a reputation as a fair but firm rancher, while still occasionally assisting the new marshal with particularly difficult cases. "Mama, look," Thomas called, sitting tall in the saddle as Jacob led the pony in a circle. "I see you." Grace called back, smiling at her son's proud expression. "You're a natural, just like your father." Jacob caught her eye and winked, the same spark between them that had been there from the beginning, now deepened by years of shared joys and challenges. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Grace and Jacob sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset as they did most evenings. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Grace asked, resting her head on Jacob's shoulder. "If you hadn't come back that night when the barn was burning," Jacob's arm tightened around her. "I believe we were meant to find each other, one way or another. But I'm grateful every day that I followed my instincts and rode back to check on the stubborn, beautiful woman with the Winchester rifle." Grace laughed softly. "I was rather prickly, wasn't I?" "You were protecting yourself," Jacob replied, kissing the top of her head. "And now you protect all of us with that same fierce heart." They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Grace thought about the frightened, bitter woman she had once been, convinced she didn't deserve happiness. How wrong she had been. "I love you, Jacob Blackwood," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of their shared history and the promise of their future. "And I love you, Grace Blackwood," he replied, his voice as steady and true as it had been the day he first told her she was everything he'd prayed for. As night settled over their ranch, Grace said a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances, for the courage to open her heart again, and for the man beside her who had never stopped believing in the love they could build together. In the vast expanse of the Colorado Territory, where life was often harsh and unforgiving, they had created something precious and enduring: a family, a home, and a love that had healed old wounds and created new possibilities neither could have imagined alone. And as the years passed, Grace would often tell their children and eventually their grandchildren the story of how she once whispered that she didn't deserve love, until a persistent marshal with kind blue eyes showed her that she was everything he had ever prayed for, and in doing so, gave her the greatest gift of all: the courage to believe it herself.